also a cabinet advisor to the Secretary of State for Digitalization and Artificial Intelligence in the Spanish government. So she has a lot of experience coming from not only academy and innovation, but also industry and of course administration. And I think that this merge is creating a unique profile to understand and push for innovative projects on the field of digital technology planning and strategy. Now she's also faculty at IE Business School, and she's also faculty here at IAAC. Last year was one of our main faculty in the Master in City and Technology program. This year, because of her little girl coming in a couple of months, we gave her a break. We gave her a break for a year, but she will be soon back with us. So no more to say apart from the fact that we're really looking forward that Mara shares with us another way of understanding intelligence in cities, not just artificial intelligence, not just cognitive intelligence, not just human intelligence, but a merge of digital, artificial, biological intelligence, and how this could be actually harnessed in order to be applied in projects that could give us data on what is happening in our world, but could also give us power for acting into what is happening in this world. So thank you very much, Mara, for joining us in this very special format of our lecture series. We are very, very happy, and thank you everybody for joining us. We will take a kind of a hybrid format to welcome Mara, half digital clapping, half physical clapping. So thank you, Mara, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Areti, for that warm introduction. Thank you all of you who are here online and in the physical world. I think this is a really interesting format, and I don't know when I should look at you guys there or at the screen, which is a bit weird. But I've come up with a presentation that I'm going to share now. Let's see, if you bear with me. Oops, okay. Here we go. I can barely see, wait. I can barely see my...
You were sharing? Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
Fantastic.
I closed my email just in case, you know. And now I'm gonna meet someone who's sitting there. Here we go. Yeah. Okay. And now I'm going to present. Is this working? Yep. Okay. Wow. First thing, good. Okay. So I wanted to share with you, because this is also a bit of a home for me, IAAC. I was a senior researcher here, and I'm also faculty, and a lot of my work is influenced by the work that's done here at IAAC, and the work that's done by students and other faculty here at IAAC. So I decided to do a little bit of a historical perspective on how I got to the type of work that I'm doing now. So in 2012, I was working very actively within the domain of smart cities. And a lot of the work going on within the smart cities domain was somehow like what you can see in this slide here. Everybody was thinking about the future of cities as interconnected cities, systems, sensors that would be deployed within the fabric of the city, collecting data and making the city more efficient and easier to manage from the top down. And one of the key concerns about this vision about the city was that we hardly ever saw humans involved. We hardly ever saw human agency involved in the process of making the city smarter. And also a lot of this work was about controlling the city, having the city, you know, within your hand through a mobile phone, and being able to control these data streams and make the city more usable from a very kind of instrumental perspective, which left aside many of the most interesting things about cities, which is people, the things that we do, the social life, the things that go wrong within the city issues, the dirty side of the issue. I like this phrase that an anthropologist from Intel, my PhD was funded by Intel, so I spent a lot of time collaborating with them. And there was this anthropologist there who used to say, in this smart city vision, the city is a toy-like city that a white man in a suit can control with one hand. And a lot of the images that you'll see kind of come from this idea. Now, at the same time, in 2012, if you paid attention to what was going on in the realm of social innovation, digital social innovation, the picture was totally different. We started seeing how citizens were harnessing the potential of open source technologies, of low-cost technologies, to intervene within the city. So, okay. Much better now? To intervene within the city. So for example, around these years, we had the first air quality egg, which was an open source sensor technology. You can see here in the screen that was allowing communities to collect data on air quality. Our colleague Usman Haq created Patch Bay, which was the first kind of search engine for the Internet of Things that allowed people to connect sensors to the internet and make the data browsable. A lot of these interfaces that I'm showing you now in this slide don't even exist anymore, but this was just in 2012. There was a surge of collective intelligence harnessing the potential of these technologies to make cities better. The first prototype of the Smart Citizen Kit that you know very well was crowdfunded around those years. People were collaborating over open platforms like OpenStreetMaps. I guess you're familiar with it. There were these really interesting gatherings called HOTS for humanitarian mapping, for example, where people would collaborate online to map the cities. After the nuclear disaster at the Daiichi power plants in Fukushima, you may remember, citizens collaborated using open source technologies in the SafeCast project to measure nuclear radiation, and they shared the data in Patch Bay. And more cities started using software like Fix My Streets to engage citizens in collaboratively addressing problems of the city. So we have like these two visions, right? It's like top-down, company-led, technology-led approach to making cities smarter. And at the same time, we see citizens independently or autonomously from the bottom up using the same technologies, but to change the city in the way that they see fits, right? Addressing problems that they care about. So this inspired me to investigate what engages people. How can collective intelligence make cities better? Because I truly believe that it is in the intersection between collective intelligence and this energy that people can come together and the different ideas that different types of people have, that actually the city can truly be improved, especially because people know what are the problems that affect them very, very well. They know the nuances in this problem. And because it is civic participation is not just about going out there in the ballot box and voting every 3-4 years. It's much more about city making and about civic engagement in everyday life. So how can collective intelligence help transform our cities? One of the things that I did back in those years as part of my PhD was to investigate what worked. Which of these bottom-up projects that use technology to improve cities worked, and why did they work? And this investigation allowed me to create an initial framework on what I learned would guide the process of harnessing the potential of collective intelligence to improve our cities. So this framework was co-created with the city of Bristol in the United Kingdom and an organization called KWMC, which does a lot of community work. And I could spend an entire hour just explaining this framework. You'll find it online. It's been very much documented. But what I just want to say for you to understand my approach here is that any project, the model states that any project that aims to harness the potential of collective intelligence to draw people together and improve our cities needs to start with the identification. This is icon here like this, the identification of a matter of concern. People come together as a collective because they care about solving a problem. A lot of the smart city projects didn't have this trigger, didn't engage people because they were not focusing on solving a problem that people simply care about. So the first process for the first approach or the first step to plan an intervention that will gather people's participation is to identify matters of concern. Matters of concern are not big problems, abstract, like mobility or climate change. That's way too far away from people's everyday experience. A matter of concern is something that sits in the intersection between your everyday life and your community. It's more about noise levels in the square where I live, or poverty being faced by community members, or an issue that I have in my house, but many other of my neighbors have as well. So these are smaller, and these are the type of elements that we need to identify to trigger community engagement. Community engagement, most of the times, participation comes from well-established matters of concern. So my processes always start there. Then we go on to framing, trying to understand, can technology and data do something to solve this? Not everything can be solved with technology, thanks God. And if we try to approach everything with this solutionistic mentality, we may fail as well and even create more problems. So framing is about understanding what can technology do there. But you start with the problem, not with the technology. A lot of smart city projects start with the technology. Just because we can do it, we'll go out and do it. Well, don't expect a lot of people to just participate because of that. Then we go on to using co-creation and co-design to involve people in the process of designing the intervention. Then we deploy the technologies and the intervention to solve the problem, the matter of concern that we've identified. We orchestrate participation, we bring in more people on board, and then we assess the outcomes all together. It is very important, if you want to trigger collective intelligence and participation, that people get feedback on what's changed with their participation. A lot of the times we get asked to participate, to engage, but then everything that happens ends up in a black box. And nobody tells you what was the outcome of your contribution, all this energy, all your ideas, what did it change? We hardly ever get these levels of accountability and transparency from our politicians or from the people who are running the engagement processes. All in all, this is very quickly the rationale of the process that I've been deploying with working with communities in cities for the past, I don't know, 6, 7 years. Now we'll see this in action. The first intervention where we deployed this was in Bristol, in the city of Bristol in the UK. As I said before, the first stage was to identify matters of concern. This entails talking to people, going to the neighborhoods, collecting evidence on the types of messages that people are putting out there. You see here, for example, in Barcelona, people use the houses, they hang from their windows signs, stop tourism, or silent concern are, but sometimes there are other cities where the only way that you'll find out is just going to a bus stop and asking to people and so on. You can use open innovation platforms as well, but if you do that, you have to bear the digital divide. Not everybody participates in online conversations. So there's this online and offline work that you need to do. In Bristol, we identified 3 matters of concern that people cared about. One was damp at home, humidities at home. This was a huge issue. A lot of the houses had humidity, damp at home, and nobody was assessing this problem. The second one was biodiversity in green spaces, the lack of biodiversity due to pollution. There were a lot of communities of bird watchers that were super worried because they had identified that a lot of the species that used to be there in the parks, they were no longer there. Other projects were investigating why bats had left the parks. Bats are a great indicator of biodiversity and pollution. And other groups of people were worried about footfall and the lack of, how the lack of footfall in certain areas was causing that local shops were disappearing in favor of big chains, like the local cafe in favor of the Starbucks and so on. So once the community decided to stick to the problem of damp because it was a problem that was affecting people's health. If you live with damp at home, you are likely to develop respiratory disease. It correlates with school absenteeism and other problems. Now, what is the problem with having damp at home? If you rent a house and you have damp, the responsibility for taking care of that is the landlord, okay? But you need to be able to prove that what you have is structural damp and not condensation. So here I put a few pictures for you to see. In some pictures, you'll see the classic condensation because you shower and you don't open the window, or you boil water in the kitchen and you don't open the window. Well, that won't affect your health. That's normal, right? But if you call the landlord and blame him for that, he'll say, look, you're destroying the paint in the house. It's your fault, right? Whereas structural damp looks much more like fungus, like what you can see in there, and that's really bad for you. Now imagine a city council has legal instruments to get landlords to solve the problem of damp, if you have it. But you have to prove that it's damp, right? So this community decided in the framing process that they could create this open source technology, which is this frog sensor. They decided to make it look like that, like a frog, to measure, to be able to identify whether there was a problem of damp or a problem of moist. And this can be done by measuring temperature and humidity throughout time and assessing the peaks of the delta, the difference between these two measures in time will give you a fair evidence of whether you have a problem of damp of condensation. The frogs were installed in people's houses. People were trained to learn to understand the frog data, and the data was mapped in the city. It allowed to identify that actually a lot of the houses with damp were sitting in this delta in the city, and there was a reason why they had so much damp, which is the water underneath, which allowed the communities to understand why there was this problems of damp. And also it created an opportunity for the city council to intervene and applying the norm that they already have to make it compulsory for landlords to use to repair the dumps. All this project is has been documented in this website. You can see it online, and it was the first time that we managed to see how this model that started with identifying matters of concern and then co-creating technologies could really lead to solutions to issues that people care about. We decided to take it to the next level with the Making Sense project, which was the IAAC was one of the partners. And in this project, we used a similar, an adapted version of this model to to do 9 pilots in different cities. We worked in Amsterdam, in Barcelona, and in Pristina, the capital of Kosovo. I'm going to explain to you one intervention which took place at the Plaza del Sol. I'm sure a lot of you know this square. Yeah? You've probably been drinking in there. So this square is very well known because people go there at night and drink. And people have been doing this for years. And the truth is that this has created several issues for the residents who live around the square because of the noise levels. So we worked with the community of neighbors living in the flats around the square with a well-identified matter of concern. What was the matter of concern here? Noise levels that correlated to late night drinking in the square. Now, for many years, citizens have been complaining about this noise, but they didn't have any data to demonstrate that these noise levels were wrong, right? So they had a hypothesis about these noise levels being too loud, but how did they prove that was the case to get the city council into action? So in the framing process, we realized, okay, there is local legislation that establishes limits. What are the limits? Urbanists here in the room? Even less. Yeah, outside, outdoors. But let's say that in a place for leisure, let's say we shouldn't have anything over 55, but at night that goes down, right? So we have a legislation. All we needed to do was collect data to assess whether the noise levels were beyond those limits or not. And then we could enforce action. See, it's never technology alone, right? So working with them, we improved the design of the sensor. We deployed 25 sensors. We created a sensing strategy. We co-created it with citizens. They decided with experts where the sensors should be located. They even learn how to analyze data and so on. They even created artifacts to be deployed at the square to engage even more people, to bring the people who were making the noise on board. And after 6 weeks of measuring noise levels, they were able to demonstrate that, as you can see in these graphs, the noise levels in the square were way beyond what's the limit established by the local legislation. But also the World Health Organization says that if you live with more than 70 decibels, this will affect your health. So now we have very interesting data to support that, yes, the noise levels are above what's allowed. And also they are at the edge of what the World Health Organization considers as a healthy level of noise. Plus, the third thing, it supports the hypothesis that noise levels correlate to late night drinking, which was the other thing that they needed to prove. Because if you can see, the noise levels become higher in the late afternoon and at night. So with this data, they were able to not to substantiate their claims. As you can see in this tweet, they're just starting to say, okay, it's not just that I'm saying that it's noisy, I'm showing you the data of the sensors. So this is really interesting appropriation of evidence, of data, that is changing the discourse of citizens, because they feel like data belongs to them. And now data is a way of bringing some objectivity to the problem that they've been trying to solve so long. They made it to the covers of a lot of the newspapers. They were invited to TV, and the problem became much more well known. And did this bring a solution? No, of course not. Because as I said before, technology alone will not solve anything. And also we didn't want to create a climate of confrontation. It's us suffering the noise and you guys drinking out there, because this is not going to solve anything. So the idea was to co-create a citizens' assembly to take the public space, to invite all the people who participated in the project, but also those who go and enjoy the square, and try to, together with the evidence on the table, co-create potential solutions. Why is this important? Because every time in the city that you deploy a solution, there's going to be a compromise, always. And this is why co-creation and collective intelligence has such a strong role, because when people feel like they've been part of the solution, they're much more likely to adopt the given solution because they feel a sense of ownership. They feel like they've been part of it. So in these co-creation assemblies, we deployed 6 thematic tables where citizens could discuss potential solutions. A number of their ideas, 17 ideas were submitted to the city council and 4 of them were implemented by the city council. One was to change the time at which the square gets cleaned. Instead of waiting until 4 a.m. to clean it when everybody has left, they clean it much earlier, after midnight, which means that people stand up and leave. And so there's an opportunity for people to use the square, but not stay there until 4 a.m., making it really hard for the residents to sleep. Also, a communication campaign in 3 languages, because we discovered that a lot of people that uses the square actually speak English. They don't speak Spanish or Catalan. So there was a need to communicate the problem in the 3 languages. Also, in this part of the square where there is stairs, a lot of people would gather, and that's where most of the noise would be created. So a lot of the people living in front of those stairs that you see there were the most affected by this noise. So they suggested to create these flower planters there that you can see, so as to reduce the space for people's gathering. And therefore, because there's less people, people don't need to scream so loud, and therefore they reduce the noise. And so those planters were installed. And moreover, a children's park was deployed as well. This was really interesting. We worked with school children, and we identified that a matter of concern for them was that they thought that this square was a square for the drunk. They didn't want to go there because they felt that was dirty, that was dangerous, and so on. So the neighbors wanted to see whether it was possible to slowly start changing the culture of the square, the way the square was used, by deploying new artifacts, such as a children's playground, which was deployed and welcomes children in the afternoon. The same approach, obviously, this is, it's very important that we understand that obviously things, I don't like to talk about urban solutions because things are changing all the time in a city. So when you have what we call a wicked problem, a problem that comprises many different variables, you don't aim for a solution because you know that things won't change from one day to the other and then that's it. You aim for a better state of situation. You want to improve the state of a thing, understanding and accepting that things are changing and emergent behavior will happen, okay? So don't, because I know that the question will be, but I still went drinking there last week. Yes, I know, people still go drinking there. And one thing that can happen there as well is that you push everybody out of that square and they show up in a different square. And now you created the problem somewhere else. So you need time to adapt these solutions to people's culture and improve the state of the situation, right? Always in working with these sort of complex problems, aim for that. The same approach we've done with denosis, for example, tackling odor issues in the city of Barcelona. You are in a neighborhood where this is a bit of an issue. And so we came up with this project to identify, to use people's senses, in this case, people's noses, to be able to identify and map odors in the city, and then use retro trajectories and the movement of wind to identify what is the source of the odor, and then be able to implement solutions. And we also even use collective intelligence to assess a big problem in this type of projects, which is data governance. How do you govern the data of the citizens that is being contributed to address a problem? This was a project, Decode, where citizens not only received sensors, smart citizen kits, but these sensors were also mapped onto a sovereign identity, and using smart contracts allowed people to decide how the data would be shared. I want to quickly stress this because I think it's a big problem. You cannot just go out there throwing sensors and getting people to freely give their data, because data is attached to has a lot of can reveal a lot of privacy things about our lives. So it's very important that we also empower people to control the data that they share. And collective intelligence can also be used to decide what is the best way to share this data or not, under which conditions. And this is what we did in this project, where people said, okay, if the data is going to go, the data from my sensor is going to be going to the city council. I just want it to be aggregated with other sensors, because otherwise the city council will know if I had a party last night, which is not allowed, and so on and so on. And if my other community fellow neighbors want to see the data, they can see it without being aggregated. Do you understand? So we can also use the power of collective decision making to improve problems of data governance. Now, imagine me trying to work for all these years on making cities more sustainable, working in a lot of projects on air quality, and at the same time realizing that each time I'm deploying more and more sensor technologies out there. A lot of these sensors have a very short life and need to be changed every 6 months, for example. So how is this contributing to the sustainability of the city? I remember in the final presentation of the Making Sense project, the European Commission asked this question, and they say, how sustainable is it that you give sensors to everybody, and that a lot of these sensors you need to change every 6 months? Is that sustainable? And then I thought, well, it's really not. I mean, under the flag, carrying the flag of sustainability, we are filling up cities with e-waste, because at some point this is going to be e-waste. And until we plan a proper model for the circularity of these systems, we need to find more resilient ways of coping with pollution. So that triggered this idea of starting to investigate what sort of plant intelligence or animal intelligence we could build on to identify pollution, to continue working along these lines. So within the Making Sense project, we began this process of thinking, okay, what can we use? And we discovered that, for example, cabbage can be used to measure acidity, that soil and moist and other elements could be used to create low-tech sensors that don't use electricity, don't require electronic components. And this took us to this big project, Cities Health, where we started to measure air quality, not with sensors, but with diffusion tubes that are much less contaminating than sensors. And ultimately, we collaborated with this project called Vigilantes del Aire that finally taught us that we can measure air quality using strawberry plants. And this collaboration meant that we were able to deploy 5,000 strawberry plants and in different cities of Spain, in 1,000 plants in each of the 5 cities of Spain that we worked with, in collaboration with Ibercibis, a foundation in Aragon. And the interesting thing here is that we could engage way more people. Imagine having to distribute 5,000 sensors, the cost of it, and the pollution you create, and the energy consumption, and you would never reach those numbers. It would be super expensive. But what we saw here is that plants that are less than €1 each were allowing us to measure air quality. And let me tell you how this works. So we distribute these plants to citizens in different areas, and citizens will grab the flower pot and put it in their balconies, okay? Now the plant will sit outside in the balcony between 1 and 3 months, and particles in the air that have metallic components, which actually harm our lungs and get into our bloodstream and so on, and it's so bad for us, will sit on the leaves of the strawberry plants. If you ever saw a strawberry plant, you'll see there's these little hairs, and the particles will land in there and they will stay in there, okay? So after 3 months, people will cut 3 of the leaves, the bottom, not the new ones, obviously, the ones that have been more exposed to pollution. They'll put it in an envelope and they'll send it to the lab, okay? And within the lab, we'll use a biomagnetization system that basically what it does is it sends a magnetic pulse to each leaf, right? And because the particles in the air that have landed in the leaf have metallic components, have metal, all of a sudden they'll be magnetized. And we'll be able to know within the circumference of the leaf, right, how many particles of metal are in there. What is the concentration? And if we know where these leaves or these plants were geolocated, because citizens also provide this information, we are able to create a 3D map of air pollution, of pollutants in the city, right? So you can see here the results of the first campaign, which we did last year. Last year was, we had this horrible Gloria storm, and a lot of the plants flew away from the balconies. I don't know if you remember. People went out the day after and they sent us a message saying, my plant is not there anymore. But we were lucky enough to recover at least like 300 and something plants, and they were sent to analyze. And what's really interesting here, you see the results. First, you see in the first map, you'll see the strawberries where they were geolocated, and then the results of those who contributed the leaves back. And obviously, we were able to map the pollutants. You'll see as you go towards red, it's more concentration, heavier concentration of metals in the leaves. And if you see this map, it truly correlates with maps of air pollution in Barcelona. You can go to the Vigilantes del Aire website and see this map with more resolution, and you'll see that actually there is a correlation between the pollution detected by the plants and the official maps. Some, depending on where people would put the plant, we'll see a lot of difference. If you put it outside and you live in the Balmes street, you'll see one type of pollution. But if you put it in the back, in the balcony at the back, where there's the internal garden, the pollution level would change massively. So we were able to assess that this is a valid method to measure air quality, building on the collective intelligence and contribution of people, but also on the plant intelligence, on the plant's capacity to act as biosensors at a way lower price, and allowing us to engage people that would have never engaged with a sensor. We had children, we have the elderly participating. It was truly amazing in terms of engagement. We've just done it last week, 2 weeks ago, also in Barcelona and in Madrid, and we expect to have promising results. So last, and to finish, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence now, and everybody is talking about automation and how basically humans will be displaced and machines will be doing everything for us. Now, what I'm trying to see, what I'm seeing is that, again, this is not actually the case. Again, something amazing occurs when we bring together collective intelligence and artificial intelligence. For example, there's this really interesting intervention by Citizen Lab where they use artificial intelligence to help cluster the contributions of citizens. They created this open innovation platform, and over 3 months, people contributed 1,700 ideas to solve urban issues and voted 32,000 times. And of course, this type of scale in participation is really hard to analyze and to provide feedback. And they use artificial intelligence to be able to cluster the data and to identify what were the trends. This is a way in which we can scale up participation, but also we can use artificial intelligence to make sense of that participation and use this information to inform policymakers in a way that makes sense. This was also used in Decide Madrid, where the platform Decide Madrid was used to collect ideas from people on how to improve the city. And then artificial intelligence was used to cluster and process these ideas, making the whole process more efficient. This is important because a lot of times people don't want to do this big consultation because it takes a lot of work to analyze and to make decisions. But with artificial intelligence, we can augment collective intelligence and make it more meaningful. Then another use is, for example, in iNaturalist. iNaturalist is a platform that it's a citizen science platform where collective intelligence is used to identify species and geolocate species. Now, the problem is that in a lot of cases, people cannot identify what is it exactly that they are seeing. So iNaturalist is using computer vision and artificial intelligence to help make sense of what are the species. And now imagine the potential of this. You have thousands of people all over the world using iNaturalist to identify and classify species, right? If the engine is well trained, if the algorithm is well trained, then it will be able to find these species in any footage or any image, right? And you might be able to find a shark that you thought had disappeared, was extinct, in a footage of some diver in some part of the ocean somewhere, right? So the potential for scaling up this collective intelligence through these networks is amazing. We are using artificial intelligence to also create conversational agents that allow people to plan their own citizen science interventions. So we have the citizen science toolkit, and we realized that it was very hard for people to navigate the content of the toolkit. And decide, okay, what tool should I use in this case or not? So we are designing a chatbot to be able to ask people questions and help them orient themselves on what best to use. So conversational agents, we're going to see a lot of them, and they will become very, very precious to us, assisting us in making the right decisions, assisting communities to make sense of data, for example, which is super important. This is from a report by Nesta, just because I knew that by this time I would have been running out of time. So I just put this slide to show what are the many things that artificial intelligence can do in collaboration with collective intelligence, and how it can boost and foster it. Can go from optimizing processes, making sense of data, increasing the scale and the reach of collective intelligence. It is being used to provide advice on certain things, to help classify things and species and so on. So just to come back to the beginning, we had all these futuristic ideas and we still have them. I just told you that it all started in 2012 with these ideas of the smart city. And now it's not so much about the smart city, it's about artificial intelligence everywhere, making everything automatic and rendering the human useless, because robots will take our jobs and teach and preach and do everything. And again, I think that this is one side of the story, but there is a different story. To me, the future will look much more like this, where we'll be collaborating with each other, harnessing the potential of collective intelligence, augmenting this collective intelligence with artificial intelligence and technologies, and being much more mindful and conscious of the power of non-human intelligence that we can collaborate with to really make these networks of intelligence much more resilient and much more durable and robust, so that we have a future of cities that take into account the complexity of the systems that we inhabit and goes beyond this centrality of humans and technology, hopefully. So thank you. That was a rush.
Thank you, Mara.
That was a total rush.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I need to be close to the microphone. Thank you for a very, very... It's interesting to see how the initial idea of smart city has had everybody confused, that this is really all about technology. And this is really all about sensors and about big data. And that was a huge potential for the cities. I think that created a big gap into administration. I think that a lot of cities all of a sudden started to, you know, like wanted to become the first city to do that or to implement this infrastructure. And then they started signing contracts with telecommunication companies and giving away the data of their citizens, not because they wanted to do that, but because there were all these privacy issues and all these, you know, like sub consequences of these technologies that nobody would foresee coming because it was very, very new, no? So I really enjoy the alternative vision of how we can overlap the collective or the crowd intelligence together with biological and artificial one. And my first question, just to warm up both physical and virtual room, is the idea of circular feedback, because you have commented about this in the beginning, you know, like for people to change behavior and data are actually values that they translate the behavior of people at the end of the day. For people to change behavior, for society to change their lifestyle and their habits, they need to be aware of certain information. They need to be aware of certain measurements, not as a matter of a value, because a value is a number and not always we get to understand that, but as a moralistic idea of the impact of this information. So I wanted to ask you how, from your work, how important is the circular feedback for the people to start changing the behavior, and whereas you believe that this could actually lead to a potential change into some of the biggest challenges that we're facing today, including climate change or including social inequality, whereas this is something that could change from the bottom up if people are more informed.
Absolutely, yes. This is a really good question because for people to be able to change their behavior, there needs the first stage in behavior change is awareness, gaining awareness of a problem. And what data systems can do is help you become aware of a problem by having multiple sources of data that make you, that give you somehow objective view of the problem. And in fact, the first stage is awareness, knowing of the problem. And the second stage is engagement. We know that the more people engage in civic action, the more likely they are to develop civic behaviors with time. So you might think that starting, you know, to contribute to a very small pilot in your neighborhood to measure air quality, it's something very small and very situated. But what we do know is that with time, people start to develop more and more civic behaviors because they start to see the impact that they can have. They start to feel, they start to see the results that they can obtain. So absolutely, enabling these feedback loops is crucial to foster behavior change. Now, I want to say something about this. I'm not in favor of putting all the pressure on individual citizens. I would like people, I think it's very positive that people have more civic behaviors and they engage in more sustainable behaviors. But our contribution to behavior change is very small compared to agriculture, our industrial system, and so on. So I think that we have to be aware that a lot of the times it's easier to put the blame on citizens and to put all the weight of the decision on people when we actually have to rethink our industrial models, the farming system, the fashion system, and so on. The cool thing is that by having awareness of the problem, you can also advocate for policy change. So it's not just about changing my behavior and being more sustainable, it's also about having enough information to be able to lobby at the right level to achieve the kind of systemic changes that we need to tackle the big problems that we have.
Thank you. Great. We will take a couple of questions from here in the room, but please also share with us in the chat anybody that has a question or wants to unmute and directly ask Mara. I see that Sasan is there with a question. Before maybe going to Sasan, Alex, you wanted to ask something. If you can come closer to the micro.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's that?
Mira tu tiempo, que tienes como 15 minutos.
Thank you, Mara. An incredibly interesting lecture. And what I think is also a very accurate depiction of the way we envision our cities, especially in Europe. And this is the segue to my question, because I've been thinking about these bottom-up, top-down approaches quite a lot, and I've noticed in the past 5 years that civic engagement, especially in the way that is so beautifully described in your lecture, is not something we can take for granted, especially in contexts where democracy is not taken for granted. I really like the way you ended the lecture with a vision of the city. It's also the vision that I hold, and I think that we also try to give to the students here.
My question is, how do we adapt this vision in places where democracy is nothing? Civic engagement is nothing. Take into consideration.
1 second, they can't hear.
They can't hear? No.
No, if they can hear, then.
Just to
reiterate the last part of the question is how do we adapt this vision that you finished the lecture with in places where democracy is not taken for granted, civic engagement is not taken for granted, where the top-down approach is taken for granted. I'm not going to name any names, but if you've been to any Smart City Expo, you know which places are those. Places that defy the censor. And yes, this adaptation is something that is quite troublesome.
Yeah, I think.
I'm sorry, we cannot hear.
I mute myself.
Okay.
I was muted somehow. Okay. Can you hear now? Yes? Okay, alles gut. Okay, so it takes just to be brief, it takes a culture of participation to be free enough to engage and be courageous enough to share with everybody what you think. It doesn't happen everywhere because a lot of countries and a lot of cities, sometimes people are scared to participate. Some people, sometimes opportunities for engagement are not real in the sense that you know that whatever you say, the outcome will always be this or that, and things won't change. So participation, it's something that requires a culture, and it's something that requires a lot of openness from the side of those who implement these systems. I see a lot of times where governments want to implement participatory processes and so on, but then they're not really open enough to take what comes from the public, because it may be so different from what they expected. And so if you do it once and you invite people to participate, and then you provide no feedback, none of the outcomes of the collective intelligence are actually implemented, you'll burn people out, and you'll miss an opportunity really to bring in collective intelligence to change the cities. So we need to create a culture of participation, and we need a lot of transparency, and we need a lot of sound methodologies to really engage people. Something that's really promising that is happening now is, I don't know if you're familiar with this new wave that it's now called the deliberative wave, and it's city councils and governments increasingly adopting citizen assemblies methodologies to discuss climate change solutions. For example, in you know that in France last year, when Macron tried to pass a number of laws that impacted the way in which people could use their cars to come into the city, especially diesel and highly polluting cars, there were all the problems with the yellow vests. And there were barricades in the city, and there were people manifested very strongly. Some people manifested very strongly against these measures, because one of the things that we're seeing is a lot of polarization in our cities, a lot of polarization in public opinion. And these solutions towards climate change are creating a lot of polarization because they're leaving people behind. Because some people don't have the means to adopt the green measures, and then they feel like they are being punished by these modern ideas about more environmental sustainability and so on. So what they have done in France and in Scotland and in Bristol, and it's going to happen here as well, is to use, they have realized that unless they involve people in making the decisions about how to achieve carbon neutrality within the next years, it will be impossible to impose new norms on people without leaving anybody behind. And so governments are increasingly using deliberative democracy practices such as citizens' assemblies to bring people on board in the discussions of what to do to reach climate neutrality and how to do it. And this has happened in France with the citizen assemblies for the climate. I don't want to say it in French because my French will sound awful, and Matilde here will laugh at me. Will say the citizen assemblies for the climate in French. In Scotland, they started the climate conversations, which are citizen assemblies, again, to discuss climate change. And here in Barcelona, the platform Decidim will be used to co-create this type of solutions. So I see that more and more people are understanding that participation is not just a nice to have. For the type of challenges we're facing in the future, we will need to have everybody on board, and to create less polarization, more inclusion, we'll need co-creation and collective intelligence.
Thank you, Mara. There is a question from Sasan and from Salvador in the chat. Sasan, if you want to unmute.
Yeah.
And direct the question to Mara.
Thanks for the lecture. It was amazing.
I can't hear.
Really enjoyed it. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. Thank you, Mara. It was an amazing lecture with a great ending and the future vision. But my question is that in the world of artificial intelligence and data science and all these things, and with the vision that you provide, how does mindfulness with collective intelligence combine with AI solving the biases? I mean, is there intermediary to solve the biases in collective intelligence?
That's really interesting. Well, but I think artificial intelligence, So how can we control for biases in collective intelligence, right?
Yeah,
That's the question.
of course. I mean, when we have the mindfulness of the people in the collective intelligence, because we're gathering the people's data when they are mindful. And when they're mindful, I mean, it's pretty related to Alex's one, but more of the techie side.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we resolve these things?
Okay, so the problem of, I think the problem of biases is more prone to occur within artificial intelligence systems than with collective intelligence. And I'll tell you why. I mean, there's this new concept of, so for participation, we talk about integrity. So integrity has to be a key element in participation, and it aims to ensure plurality, that you don't have a group of citizens co-opting the conversation and steering the discussion in one direction that may be biased or skewed, right? So in processes of deliberation, you can see the processes. It is transparent to you for most of the cases. The problem is that in artificial intelligence, a lot of these decisions taken by algorithms happen within a black box. And we don't have the same level of transparency and accountability of the systems. So what we would demand as integrity for collective intelligence, we call fairness in artificial intelligence. The concept of fairness to prevent biases in artificial intelligence is crucial. And this is where I think that the two systems come together, really can contribute to each other very closely, because the plurality of collective intelligence can help you assess the biases in or correct some of the biases of artificial intelligence, and vice versa. But for this to happen, and this is a key question, Sasan, so thank you, you need transparency, both in the process that had led to collective intelligence output. Who was invited? Who took part? You know, now yesterday, well, on Sunday in Chile, they voted, they want to have a new constitution. And the way in which this constitution will be made is through public deliberation. And one of the principles is to determine who gets to participate and how are these people chosen, so that we can eradicate or take care for the, or assess the kind of biases that might emerge from this participation. And this happens in collective intelligence, and the same level of transparency needs to be demanded for algorithmic decision making. Because you cannot have a system that makes decisions that will change people's life, and nobody knows if the system is biased or the decisions are simply not fair.
Thank you.
Just because here we have some restrictions in mobility, and Mara needs to get at home on time, we only have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So I'll take them as they are there in the chat. Salvador, do you want to share your question with Mara?
A ver, yo lo puedo ver aquí.
Yeah.
Chat.
Chat, yeah.
How was the process of to educate citizens with smart contracts? Is that question? What are your recommendations to collaborate with citizens and train collectively models for computer vision? Very interesting. Okay, so every time you will deploy technology in a community setting, you need to assess the digital maturity of the community. So you'll see within a community, you'll have people who have very high technical skills, and they very quickly make sense of technology. And you'll have people that have very little experience with technology. So you need to create systems. In computer science, we call them low floor, high ceiling. So systems that are low floor, so everybody can step in, and they are high ceiling because you can go up in complexity according to your level of expertise. If you make it too simple, too basic, people with very valuable skills will disengage. If you make it too complex, people who don't have digital skills will not even join. And what you want in this co-created scenarios for collective intelligence is plurality. So you need to scaffold the complexity of technology. For the Decode project, which is what Salvador is asking, where we used smart contracts to manage sensor data, it took, we had first a cohort of early adopters who I must say they did have some relevant digital skills. We didn't pilot this with low tech communities. I'm being super honest here. But people received these booklets that documented all the how the technology worked, following a step-by-step approach, so that it made it really easy for people. Now, a key concern here, Salvador, is that these processes using smart contracts like this are not fully scalable yet. So if we wanted to, if with that project we wanted to include more and more people, it would have been really problematic, and for sure we should have redesigned the system to make it way more low floor, because these are not easy to understand technologies. And my recommendation, well, training people is crucial. Training people to be able to operate technologies for sensing projects is crucial, and we do it in all our projects. But it's not just about teaching people as in a lecture. Believe it or not, I don't like lecturing people. I think that we need to be smart to design systems in a way in which the knowledge is embedded in the system. So as people use the system, they learn how to do it. Nobody teaches. One of the best things that my discipline, human-computer interaction, has created is this type of devices. You don't need to read any instructions. You're given this device, and in this act of interacting with the device, you learn how it goes. And I aim to do the same with all the processes that I design. Even if they don't use technology, I try to design systems where the knowledge is embedded, and your experience with the process or the system will make you learn about it. In computer vision projects, and in particular in the case of the project the citizen science project that I've shown here, where you have to recognize species, you always train people. It's crucial. Otherwise, they will do wrong assessments, and they will not be able to train the algorithm. So there are some really beautiful citizen science projects, for example, on butterfly recognition or bird recognition, that for you to become an advanced user, you need to go through the training and learn how to do the recognition, so that then you can actually train the algorithm with your choices.
That's great.
Shall I? Do I?
No, I mean, do you have a time for one more
Okay,
question?
I'll take one more, unless there's one here, because there are a lot of questions in the chat. There's one question here. People are scared to remove their masks.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh? Okay, so there's one here. I'm gonna answer the one. Oh my God, at the time. Okay, regarding the noise pollution problem, how did you and citizens manage to handle so much data? I'm sorry, but could you repeat, summarize the question?
This is because they haven't heard Alex's
okay,
question.
okay.
The question is about how do you manage so much data?
Yeah. Okay. So we had 25 sensors that were relaying data to the platform every 5 seconds for 6 months. So there was a lot of data there. And obviously for the smart citizen team who were behind the data, it was quite easy to analyze the data because they had done this before, and because they could use different tools to visualize and map the data, like Jupyter and Pandas and so on, to visualize the data and make sense of it. Now, the key question was how to help people make sense of the data. People with very low data skills. And so one of the, we tried different methodologies, but one that worked very well was basically just printing the waves of the data into very, very long pieces of paper and putting them one underneath the other, and using different instruments, paper-based instruments to allow people to compare the data themselves and draw their own conclusions. And it was very interesting because this kind of low-tech approach to data visualization was very effective in terms of helping people understand the data. But just to answer to Ivan, data sense making is one of the toughest problems when you work with citizen science, because we don't have good data skills, and it's very hard to make sense of abstract concepts such as data. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you to all of you out there, and thank you to all of you out here. It's been a pleasure.
She's closing, that's great.
No, but you have to close.
Fantastic. No, thank you for your participation. Thank you for showcasing, you know, like how we can empower people to be part of a change rather than waiting a change to happen. I think this is very fantastic. And also how technology can help us to do that. It's has been really inspiring talk, and looking forward to your next projects and looking forward to our next collaboration as well.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mara.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you. Why this?
Yeah, that's it.